Good morning. Thank you, guys. My name is Steve Countryman. I want to welcome all of you here, visitors, guests, and all of our members. We're in this series called Holy Sexuality. The preceding series was In Minnesota as It Is in Heaven. In Minnesota as in Heaven was a series where we focused on kind of being missional, bringing peace, bringing shalom to the world, to individuals in the world. This one is really, in one way, a continuation of the In Minnesota as in Heaven, because we are trying to bring peace and shalom to those, that is God's desire, to those who have experienced a world of brokenness because of sin. Maybe sexual sin, maybe some other sin. And it's just another way that we can focus on bringing God's love and God's peace to the world and to the individuals in the world. Today we are focusing on Jesus' posture toward others. And I think this may be the most important of the series. I'm probably saying that because it's kind of the most important one to me. It's the one that when we read all of Scripture, when we talk about this, when we talk about holy sexuality, what is my response? And I want my response to be one of love and one of peace, just like the songs that we just sang. So to start it off, I want to kind of nail us down on the bigger picture. I'm going to look at Revelation chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. The sea in Revelation stood for chaos. And he's saying, nope, it's shalom, it's peace. There's no more chaos. Verse 2, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all of this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. The quote, this Revelation 21 was referenced in the book, What Does the Bible Really Teach About Homosexuality? And the writer, Kevin DeYoung, references this passage, and he has this quote. He says, the heavenly vision of Revelation is the consummation of everything in Scripture. Everything in the garden, the land, the promised land, the temple pictured and predicted. No chaos, no conflict, no tears, no death, no mourning, no crying, no pain, no night, and no detestable thing. Nothing to interfere with a holy God and his holy people. The way things were, the way things should be, will finally become the way things are forever and ever. These are the stakes, right? When we're talking about these things, the stakes are high. We're talking about eternity. When we speak about sexual immorality, a holy sexuality intended by God, our Creator, we are speaking about people. Into this world of chaos, God sends his Son. John chapter 1, verse 14 says this, the Word became flesh, made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus, full of grace and truth, comes to the world. This is what God's heart is. So, we are going to talk today about Jesus' posture and his response to people. We're going to talk about then how we should respond to others. You know, Jesus' posture response, how should we respond to others? How did Jesus do it? That's what we're going to clue in on. Now, last week, Patrick talked about how Jesus never specifically addressed homosexuality, and I think he did a good job. Jesus' teaching was consistently, clearly, and universally opposed. Jewish teaching was consistently, clearly, and universally opposed to that, so he didn't have to deal with that. He spent 3 years primarily with Jews, and he didn't have to deal with that in his culture. He didn't address that specifically in the same way he did others. And so the passages in Leviticus 18, Jesus did not address incest. He didn't address bestiality. He didn't address those other sins mentioned there as well. We are going to look at what Jesus did address. How did Jesus deal with sinners? What was his posture toward others and other sins? And we can learn from that. So one of the things in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7, some people call this the Bible within the Bible. And this is a lot of Jesus' teaching. And he goes through a lot of issues. And he really raises the bar. He really takes this ethic and makes it even higher. He says, you've heard that it was said, do not murder, but I tell you, don't even be angry with your brother. Jesus really raises the stakes. He really raises the bar on the old law. And yet, even though he makes that ethic higher, he has grace toward those who don't reach that bar. So after the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7, and Matthew 8 and 9, we see these three examples. We see how Jesus talked to a centurion, a Roman centurion, in chapter 8. Later in chapter 8, he meets these two demon-possessed men, or they meet him. And then in chapter 9, he meets Matthew the tax collector. We're going to look at those passages and try to learn from how Jesus interacted with them. So, with a Roman centurion in Matthew 8, most centurions would have been oppressive, violent, abusive, not to mention prideful. I mean, that was their lifestyle. You know, they're working in that way. That was their job. Jesus would have disagreed with many things in his lifestyle. And yet, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 8, verse 10, when Jesus heard this, which was his response to asking Jesus to heal his servant, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed, said to those following him, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I think that had to hit the disciples' heart, because here's a Roman centurion whom they hate. At the very best, they can't stand him. And Jesus says, no, I have not found such great faith anyone in Israel. Then later in chapter 8, when he's dealing with these two men who are demon-possessed, they come out to meet him, and it says in verse 28, when he arrived at the other side in the region of the Gadarenes, two demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. No one could pass that way. No one did pass that way. That, they are socially outcasts. They are spiritual outcasts, and yet Jesus meets them. He heals them. He deals with them. He doesn't go around like everybody else did. He actually meets with them and does what he needs to do with them. And then in Matthew chapter 9, Matthew the tax collector. Now, tax collectors, Roman centurions, tax collectors, these would have been probably two of the lifestyles that the Jews hated more than anything else. And you think of how he reacted to them. So tax collectors were greedy. They stole money. They were victimizing their neighbors. They were working with an oppressive government. Again, there would be many things in their life that Jesus disagreed with. And yet, what was his posture toward them? How did he respond to them? So, Matthew chapter 9, verses 10 and 12. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And on hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. people's sin did not keep Jesus away. It did not stop him from interacting with them. In fact, that was the criticism from the teachers of the law, the religious people, the church people of the day. Hey, why are you hanging out with all those people? And Jesus said, well, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick. It didn't change Jesus. Jesus went out of his way to meet with the Roman centurion or the demon-possessed or the tax collectors or all these other sinners. Jesus responds with love again and again with all of these people. Even the religious people, the Pharisees, who are criticizing him. So one more example. So these three examples were from Matthew right after the Sermon on the Mount where he raises the bar. 3 examples from John. He meets with a Pharisee, mixed with Nicodemus. Then we're going to talk about the Samaritan woman at the well. Then we're going to talk about the woman caught in adultery. So Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night in John chapter 3. He's got some questions. What was Jesus' response to this Pharisee, Nicodemus? John chapter 3, 16 and 17. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. I love John 3:16. Sometimes we leave out verse 17, which is just as important. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. This is Jesus' response to one of the religious leaders, and Nicodemus is changed by that, I believe. In John chapter 4, the woman at the well, you remember her story? I don't want to take time to read all of these context passages, but her story is she's there, she's going to draw water from the well at a time when nobody else is there because she's not accepted by anybody in her culture. Number 1, she's a Samaritan. Number 2, she's a woman as far as their culture. And then one of the things we recognize, Jesus says, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now is not your husband. So what does Jesus say? John chapter 4, verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. I mean, Jews did not associate with Samaritans. Men did not speak with women. And then even in her own culture, her own village, her own town, her own people did not associate with her. And it's because of these 5 husbands. The man she's with now is not her husband. And Jesus, he does associate with her. In fact, I believe he went out of his way traveling in order to meet with her. And his message to her is, I have the truth. I have the living water. I have what can help. And it changes her. And then she becomes a witness. It changes the village. But Jesus associated with people that no one else would associate with. I think most people thought of this woman as a lost cause. 5 husbands. One she's with now is not her husband. So not just Jews, her Samaritan people. Lost cause. I think we need to be careful about considering people a lost cause. Next, John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. She's brought before Jesus. Jesus talks about sin, and he says, let him who is without sin, right, cast the first stone, and they all leave, oldest to youngest. And then in John chapter 8, verse 11, Jesus says this. Jesus asks, has anyone condemned you? Where are they? And she responds, no one, sir. She said, then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Go now and leave your life of sin. One of the things that I see with Jesus and all of these people, whether it's a Roman centurion, whether it's demon-possessed, whether it's a tax collector, whether it's a woman who's had 5 husbands and now she's living with someone else, whether it is a woman caught in adultery, all of these examples, he accepts them. He meets them. And I would say acceptance does not mean approval. We have to understand this because we have to be able to accept people. We have to be able to do that first. Jesus' posture should be the model for us today. for Christians today? How did he interact with people? How did he engage people? Sometimes went out of his own way to engage him, even though he was criticized, even all of this stuff. Jesus' posture should be the model for Christians today. Have you guys ever been to a 1-hour dry cleaning store? What's in the name of 1 hour? I have tried. I've been traveling, and I try to get a suit done the same day or a shirt done the same day. It never works. And I heard a story about a guy who was in, I think it was Houston, and he had to have it that day. So he called all these places. He found a 1-hour dry cleaning store. He goes there, and it's like a Saturday, and he says, I need this, and then they said, okay, come back Tuesday. And he's like, wait, I drove for 45 minutes to get here so it could get done in 1 hour. And the lady said, oh, that's just the name of the store. There's a lot of 1 hour or dry cleaning. There's a lot of 24 hour. I don't think any of them do it that fast. It's just a name. My problem with that is when we are calling ourselves Christians, when we are trying to be Christ-like, do we do what we say we do? Do we do as Jesus did? Or is it just a name that doesn't really mean what it's supposed to mean? I think we have to think about that. So, how do we respond to others? Jesus' posture and response, we looked at all these examples, all these passages, there's many more. How should we respond to others? Some examples I think about in my own life. And again, I think of how I interact with an unmarried couple who's living together when I first meet. How do I interact with a drug addict, alcoholic? How do I interact with an idolater, a murderer? When I hear of those things, when I meet those people, what is my response to them? It shouldn't be different than how I interact with anybody. Okay? I'll look at these last two specifically. Here's a picture. Some of you know my wife and I spent 5 years in Thailand. This is a temple, Wat Pragao, Temple of the Emerald Buddha. This is the whole complex. It's in Bangkok. So of that temple, there's one building that has the actual Emerald Buddha in it. When we were there on our survey trip, our team, trying to get a knowledge of the culture, we went there. And it's a big tourist place, as well as a bunch of Thai people going there to worship. And we go inside the temple where this Emerald Buddha is probably, like this big, 2 feet, something like that. And it's put up on this throne at the back of the temple that we're in. Thai culture, take off your shoes before you enter any house. Interesting that when we moved from Thailand to here to Minnesota, that was kind of a part of the culture here too. It wasn't in Texas where I grew up. But for different reason in Thailand, not because of snow or dirt. Anyway, it was respectful to not enter a house wearing your shoes. Head is holy, feet is not holy. It's a whole big thing. But anyway, so when we do that, we are following their culture. We take off our shoes, we go in the temple, we're quiet, we're respectful, we kneel down, not in front of the idol. We did not do that. We sat at the back and sat down like they would sit down. So maybe not kneel is probably not the right way. You kind of sit. You just can't have your feet pointing out in front of you where people can see. So we do that. And I want to tell you, I was really uncomfortable. And yet I did it. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to watch and listen. I'm trying to be respectful. And they are idolaters. I don't agree. I'm accepting them where they are, and I'm trying to learn. It was hard. But the way we interact with people, we have to be able to accept them first. I think of Paul's attitude in Acts 17 all the time. We're not going to look at the scriptures, but in Acts chapter 17, at the end of the chapter, he finds himself in Athens. And he goes around, he walks around the city, and he sees idols everywhere. And then he says, I can see that you guys are very religious. Because as I walked around, I saw all these idols to all of these different gods. And then he says, I saw one that said, to the unknown God. Now, they had their reasons for putting that there, but Paul capitalized on that and said, that's the God I want to tell you about and I want to share with you. So he accepts them. He meets them where they are. He doesn't jump up and say, all of you people who are worshiping idols are going to hell. Right? He doesn't say that. He doesn't act that way. He meets them where they are, tries to learn, tries to understand, and is gracious and is merciful as Jesus was, and yet then also tells them the truth. Murderers were listed in a lot of these lists that we read. It was in Revelation. It has been in other lists of other sins in Scripture. There was a movie called The End of the Spear. I don't remember how old it is. It's based on a true story. The movie's probably 20 years old now. I don't know. I'm getting older and older, so I don't have this good sense of time. Yeah, thanks, Travis. Appreciate it. All right. But it's based on a true story. It happened in 1956, and I'm not that old. I wasn't yet alive. So for those of you who were on, that's not a diss. All right. 1956, true story. It happened in the jungles of Ecuador. 5 men decided. One of them is Nate Saint, and he was there working with a mission organization, flying supplies and missionaries to different parts of South America, different parts of Ecuador. It's along with the Amazon jungle. And they meet a girl who's from this Wanani tribe, and they decide, Nate Saint especially, and convinces the other 4 men that, we're going to fly in and we're going to make contact with the Wadani people. The Wadani people held killing, murder, revenge killing toward their neighboring tribes as one of the highest things in their culture. It's kind of what they lived for and what they held highly and respected most about their own culture, this revenge killing and murder of the people around them. And these guys made a plane, homemade, scouted it out. They dropped them supplies. They tried, they spent a lot of time trying to, develop a relationship. They learned a few words in their language, and then they decided to fly in this little plane, land on a sandbar deep in the jungle, and try to make personal contact with this tribe. They did, and they were all killed. They were all killed at the time. Made national news. Walter Cronkite, for those of you who know him, it was all over the national news in 1956. A couple of years later, 2 or 3 years later, Nate Saints, who was killed, who was flying the plane, who was killed, one of the guys killed of the 5, sister, Rachel, decides to go in there and make contact. And with her, the wife of Jim Elliott, who was also killed, goes in with their daughter. 2 women and a daughter, young girl, go in, whose brother and husband were killed. And they go in, and they're with this tribe. And they live among them. They're not considered as much of a threat. And even though the men, when they went in, had no weapons or anything like that, they were still killed. The women were not. They just were allowed to live with them. Rachel Saint, her job was to work with missionaries linguistically, so she learned the language. She taught them. Steve Saint, so Nate Saint's son, becomes a friend, lifelong friend to the tribe. This is Minkaya, who was kind of the leader of the tribe. He ends up becoming a Christian, becoming a believer. I don't know that I could do that. If it was my brother who was killed, or if it was my spouse who was killed, if it was my dad who was killed. The reason I bring this up is because what I want to say is it's a story of sacrifice, love, and grace, more than it is judgment and punishment. And if murderers can be treated with this kind of love and grace, then I think everyone can and everyone should. It becomes more about our hearts than it is their sin. It becomes more about my heart. Is my heart willing to be gracious toward people who sin, or even people who have hurt me in this way? It becomes more about my heart than their sin. That is the posture of Jesus. Many times we're too quick to judge. Jesus first showed love. He didn't lead with the law. He didn't lead with the rules to these Roman centurions. Hey, I don't like your lifestyle. I don't like what he leads with acceptance. He leads with love, and it grows from there. It's the most important thing you can do as a parent with your children. This is truly representing the gospel of God. So in this series, Holy Sexuality, Jesus' posture toward others, what do we come away with? I have a question, and I'm wrapping it up. Is it more important to make people aware of what is right or to treat them in the right way? Let me ask it this way. You're sick and you want a doctor. Do you want a doctor who has experience, knowledge, and skill, or do you want a doctor with a good bedside manner? See? Then you're thinking about that and you're going, oh, well, wait a minute. I want a doctor that, if it's life or death, I want a doctor that's got the experience and skill. Well, I would say this. Wouldn't you want both? Don't you want both? Can't we be both? Can't we be grace and truth and not just one or the other? Jesus was both. We need to be both. Is anyone a lost cause? I want an answer to that. No. Don't write anyone off. Be grace and truth. I want to invite the praise team back up. We should be willing to leave our comfort zone. People we talk with, the people we engage, the people we hang out with, we should be willing to leave our comfort zone. Go to situations that are uncomfortable. Those guys did it in Ecuador. I was uncomfortable in Thailand. But what about here, and what about us? What about our communities? We should be willing to talk to people and visit with people and hang out with people and engage people that might make us a little bit uncomfortable. Jesus would. Now, as I wrote that for the sermon, I thought about it and I said, wait a minute. I should be willing to become comfortable doing that. Yeah, at first we're going to have to do it when it's uncomfortable, but I should be willing to become comfortable in every situation. Why? The stakes are high. We're talking about people. Jesus did it. If Jesus was grace and truth, and we have grace and truth on our side, then we should be willing to be loving, let God change our hearts so that His truth and His love and His message can change theirs. Let's stand and let's sing.